Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from England, and it is a story about a young girl who did not have a happy childhood. This is the story of Tattercoats. Once, long ago, there was an old, rich lord. He was not a very happy lord, despite the fact that he had lots and lots of money, for you see, his wife had died, and so had all of his children. He had no family left, except for one granddaughter, and he had never seen her face. For you see, when she was born, her mother had been the old lord's favorite daughter. And when the little baby was born, the little granddaughter was born, her mother died. And so her grandfather said that he would never see her face. And he went up to one of the towers of his castle, and he sat down in a chair, and he stared out at the sea, and he cried because he missed his daughter. He sat there so long crying that his tears, as they fell on the windowsill of the tower room, wore little grooves into the windowsill, and his tears ran down his face and down the grooves and out the outside of the castle and away to the river, to the great sea. He sat in that chair for so long that his white hair grew and grew and grew until it became like a carpet around him. It twined itself around the chair and bound him there, and it buried itself in the stones around his feet so that he could not move. But he didn't want to. He just wanted to sit there and cry and feel sorry for himself because his favorite daughter had died. Now the nurse tried to bring the baby in to see the old lord, but he would not have it. He told her to take the baby away. It might live or die as it chose. So from that day on, the poor young thing grew up in the kitchens, working as a servant as best she could, and trying her best to survive. She lived off of scraps of food from the kitchens. Every once in a while, the old nurse would find her a tattered piece of clothing in the rag bag, and she would put that on so that she would have something to cover herself with. And so the other servants started to call her Tattercoats. And because she was so tattered and she was so neglected, the other servants didn't like her much. And so they would tease her, and they would bother her, and they would pick on her. And so she would run away from the kitchen for a little while to get some fresh air and to get away from all of the teasing. And she would go to the green in the village nearby. Well, on the green was her one friend, aside from the old nurse who took care of her. She had just one other friend in the world, and that was the gooseherd. The gooseherd was crippled. He couldn't walk very well, but he could take care of the geese well enough. And he was very good at playing the pipes. It was a rather odd sort of thing. Whenever Tattercoats would run to him feeling just terrible because someone had picked on her, or she was so hungry, or her clothing was so tattered, and her feet were always bare and always cold in the winter, and very, very dirty in the summer, whenever she felt sorry for herself, she would go to the gooseherd, and he would pick up his pipe, and he would play a little tune on his pipe. And pretty soon, Tattercoats would forget all about how sorry she was feeling for herself, for she would get so happy, and she would just start dancing to the beautiful music that the gooseherd played. And she would use all of the geese as her dancing partners, and she would dance about, and then eventually she would be happy enough to go back to the kitchens and start working again. Well, after many, many years of this, Tattercoats was fully grown up, and news began to spread throughout the kingdom that the king's only son, the prince, was going to be looking for a wife. And so the king had decided that he would travel all over the kingdom, and they would invite all of the lords and the ladies and the fancy people to come to a great big ball, a giant party, right near Tattercoats' home. And they were all going to meet in this castle, and they would have a big ball. And then the prince would choose his wife from amongst all of the women there. Well, of course, as they were traveling about, the king came to the area, and his invitation was delivered to the old lord to come to the grand ball. Well, the Lord knew he couldn't ignore that invitation from the king, and so he called for his servants to bring him some scissors and cut him free from all of his hair that had him tied down to his chair. And they cut him free, and they brought him grand clothing and rich jewels, and they saddled his horse, and they covered it in beautiful cloths, so that he could go to see the king in style. Well, the old nurse heard that the old lord was going, and so she went to the lord and reminded him that he had a granddaughter, for he had completely forgotten about poor little Tattercoats. And she told him that he should take his granddaughter with him to the ball. But the old lord said, "No, I have vowed that I will not look on the child's face. Therefore, I will not see her. She may not come with me to the ball." And the old nurse begged and pleaded, but the old lord began to be angry, and she got a little afraid, and so she stopped begging and pleading, and she went back, crying because she felt so bad, for she knew Tattercoats wanted to go to the ball. But when she went back to the kitchen, she couldn't find Tattercoats anywhere. She had been crying in the doorway because she wanted to go to the big party, and the cook had scolded her and chased her away. And so Tattercoats had gone to the village green to see her friend the gooseherd. When she got there, she told the gooseherd all about her troubles, how she wanted to go to the big party, but her grandfather was not going to take her, for he had never seen her before in his life. And she just wanted to go and see all of the pretty people and the fancy clothes they would have, and she just wanted to see them, but her dress was so tattered, and there were holes in all of her clothes, and she didn't have any shoes, and she just didn't think that was the right way to go to see a king. Well, the gooseherd simply looked at her and smiled, and he picked up his pipe and he began to play. And before too long, Tattercoats was dancing with the geese and had completely forgotten about how tattered her dress was and how bare her feet were. And the gooseherd said, "Come, let's go together and go and see the king and all of the fancy people." And so Tattercoats skipped along beside him, and on they went down the road with all of the geese in front of them, and Tattercoats and the gooseherd skipping along behind, dancing to the happy music that the gooseherd was playing on his pipe. Well, as they were dancing down the road, a young man, a rather handsome young man, rode up on a horse. And he stopped his horse, and he climbed down off of it, and he said, "You seem like very merry people. I am looking for the castle where the king is to have the party. Would you happen to know which direction I should go?" And the gooseherd stopped playing long enough to say, "Ah, yes, we do know where it is. In fact, we're going there ourselves." And the young man said, "Well, you seem like very merry people. Could I travel with you for a little while?" And they said yes. And so they went on down the road together with the gooseherd playing his happy little tune, and Tattercoats and the young man dancing a bit as they walked along, talking to each other. And then the gooseherd started playing a different tune. Not a dancing tune, but something very pleasant to walk along by. And as they were walking and talking, Tattercoats and the young man were staring at each other a little bit. And then the young man was staring and staring and looking and looking and looking again at her. And he realized that she was so beautiful. He didn't see her tattered clothes anymore. He didn't see her bare feet anymore. All he saw was her beautiful face. Until finally he said to her, "You are the most beautiful maiden I have ever met. Will you marry me?" The Tattercoats laughed at him, and she said, "Oh no, you would be ashamed of me. I only have tattered clothes and bare feet. You would be better off marrying one of the fancy ladies that you'll meet at the party you're going to." But the young man insisted that he really did want to marry her. And Tattercoats said, "I do not think you can possibly be serious." So they walked along for a little while more. And then the young man said, "I have an idea. What if you were to come to the party at the palace tonight?" And Tattercoats said, "I do not think they would let us in." "Oh, I think they would let you in," said the young man. "And if you came to the party at the castle, then say, I know, you come to the party at midnight, and I will take you there in front of everyone, and I will call you my bride, and I will tell everyone that I want to marry you. Would you believe me then that I do want to marry you?" Well, Tattercoats said that she probably would if he said it in front of everybody, but that she was not going to go to the palace, for she did not have the right clothes, and her feet were bare, and she was Tattercoats. She didn't belong in a castle. But the young man insisted that he really did want her to come, and Tattercoats kept saying she didn't. But then the gooseherd said, "Tattercoats, my friend, do not turn away Fortune, little one, when she comes." And so Tattercoats said that perhaps she would come to the castle at midnight. Well, that night, the castle was lit up and glowing with beautiful lights and colored cloths and music, and all of the lords and the ladies in their beautiful, colorful clothing dancing about like little butterflies all over the castle in the great hall. And just at midnight, the doors opened, and in walked Tattercoats, being led by the hand, as if she were a grand lady, by the gooseherd, who was playing a merry little tune on his pipe, and along behind them came all of their geese. Well, this was rather an odd sight. All of the lords and ladies stopped dancing to watch this strange thing, this strange procession come in amongst them. The girl in her tattered dress and her bare feet, the gooseherd hobbling along on his crippled legs, and the geese following behind them, all walking right into the ballroom. Well, they walked right in as the king was staring at them in astonishment, and they stopped just in front of the king's throne, and they bowed. And when they stood up, Tattercoats' lover stood up from his seat beside the king, and he came down to her, and he kissed her 3 times. And then he took her by the hand, and he turned around to the king, and he said, "Father," for indeed, the young, handsome man that Tattercoats had met on the road was the prince. "Father, this is the girl I have chosen to marry. She's the most beautiful girl I've ever met, and besides, she is very kind and gentle, and I think she will help me rule the kingdom well." He had not even finished speaking when the gooseherd changed his tune yet again, and now the music that he was playing sounded like the birds in the treetops. And as soon as it stopped, suddenly everyone gasped, for when they turned to look at Tattercoats, she was no longer wearing a tattered dress. Now she was wearing rich robes, covered in jewels sewn all over them. And the geese that had followed them into the hall were no longer geese, but a crowd of little pages walking behind her, holding her train. Well, the king stood up to greet his new daughter-in-law, and the people cheered. The trumpets were sounded, and everyone inside the castle and outside knew that the king had chosen the most beautiful maiden in the land as his, or the prince had chosen the most beautiful maiden in the land as his wife. Now the gooseherd, no one knew what happened to him afterwards, for no one saw him go, and no one ever saw him again after that day. As for the old lord, he had vowed never to look at his granddaughter's face, and so he was forced to leave the court and go back to his lonely castle, And he went back up to his tower and sat down in his chair and began to cry even more bitterly than before, and his tears ran down and out to the sea, and his hair grew long and locked him to the chair again, for he was so sorry for himself. But as for Tattercoats and her prince, they were married, and they lived very happily. In fact, if they have not died, then I think they are living still. And that is the story of Tattercoats from England. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and join us again on Friday at 3 p.m. Central Time, when we will have another story for you here from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.